or 5 days to get the ball rolling to, search and rescue for that overdue plane. They find that at 5 days, they're all dead. Because it took 5 days to kill all the people who didn't know what to do to be able to deal with their conditions. So they figured for the fact of 2 days training for every pilot that's lost that way, it's, $20,000. So you could afford to spend $500 pilot to stay alive for a few extra days. Well, anyway, when they figured that they should instill some desert survival knowledge, they figured who should know better how to survive in the desert than to interview the people who live in the desert. And they quickly found out that if you went to a Sahara resident and said, how do you survive? First of all, the resident says, I don't understand what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
I say, well, how do you get by that? Well, as far as that person is concerned, he's saying, that happened so early with us. We have no idea what we're, so you would expect to say, oh, yes, well, I live in the desert. Therefore, let me see. The first most important thing is this. The second, that resident has no idea. He's asked to define the issue that relates to taking a city person who's totally unfamiliar with that environment and lay out the knowledge that person will have to that episode in order to stay alive, just to stay alive, let alone do as well as that Sahara Arab, you might say. So they realized that the Sahara Arab didn't know how to survive in the desert, but he just lived there. And then that was the clearest way that Ray sees. So when you're talking to an old Indian who has spent all his life in the wilderness, and you go to him and say, how do you survive? He has no idea what that means. I have aggressively tried to define what is exactly survival. 45 years later, I'm still groping. I'm still trying to polish up that definition to be able to say to a person who's a student and says, okay, I'm taking a serious, survival course from me. But what is it exactly? What are the priorities? Where is the emphasis? What is the most crucial thing? So here you are, the very last hours of the course. You sit down to supper, and then you have a little bit of goodbye, a little bit of debriefing, and so what do you think of the course we just taught? Blah blah blah, and the people will say, I've taken this 5-day course from you, and I'm still not exactly sure what is the most important thing I should know. And you'll turn around and say, well, I haven't got the answer, because I've been doing this for 10 years and I don't have the answer. So is it take a big axe or wear twice as much clothing as you normally expect? Better make sure you always take a sleeping bag with you, whatever. What is the most important thing? Well, we don't know what the most important thing really would be till that question comes up so often. And then you strive to say, okay, the next time, trying to make sure I know a little more so I'm not so embarrassed when that question is asked at the end of the course. Oh, you come to the end of the course and I says, I took a backpacking course from you before, and now I took a survival course. I can't tell the difference. You're teaching the same stuff as a backpacking course as you do a survival course.
Well, it all seems to boil down to the same things. Make sure your hydration needs are met, your food intake, your water, your shelter's there, your fire is maintained.
Yeah.
And take that to a survival situation, basically do a camping, or you blow it up to your living needs where you have a home and stuff. All those needs still need to be met. They're just amplified in different ways.
Well, if I used to say, if you want to hone your skills with regard to the issue of what is a good survival kit, it ends up being a backpacker's outfit. Trouble is, it weighs 70 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
And when you reflect on that and you say, okay, an ideal survival kit makes you independent of the environment because you might end up somewhere where there's very little for you to work with. You end up in the top. You know that you can't light a fire and stay warm for the fire because your sticks are no bigger than your little finger.
That's right.
You might make a shelter. You would likely want to have a tent and a stove. And with the stove, even though you're fueling the stove with sticks like that, pretty soon the buildup of the coals might be that now you can go to sleep for a couple hours before you have to do that again and whatever. But the issue is that the backpacker strives to produce whatever it is. Every ounce that you're carrying on your back has to account for the amount of effort. And as a result, as you carry, you're independent of the environment because you brought your tent, and you're independent because you brought a sleeping bag that's thick enough that you don't have to maintain a fire. And then you're independent of living off the land because that includes the groceries you brought and the stove to cook meals that have to be cooked, and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, a highly refined backpacker's outfit must be the ideal survival kit, albeit that you realize that it might weigh 70 pounds, sort of thing. So in a survival situation, when you have raw materials where you define what they are, boreal forest, tundra now is a different situation. Living in the high Arctic, it's a different. You realize that it's not the same thing. Desert, and all a lot. So you realize that if you specialize in the boreal forest, and if you happen to find yourself in the coastal forest, on the edge of the sea, where the produce of the ocean, that's not surviving. That's how the native people did live, and so on. But anyway, the issue is that if you're specifying boreal forest, then you know what your resources are, and ultimately it occurs to you that the resources of the boreal forest provide so much material that now your kit could weigh 1/10. So instead of 70 pounds, you're carrying 7 pounds. But you're scared. You're being a modern person. You know that those 7 pounds can provide so much comfort and whatever. And without that 7 pounds, you have to work much harder and take about another 20 university courses to make up, because the more you know, the less you have to carry and
So it's always going to boil down to the knowledge gained and practiced and worked with, because, lots of times we hear stories with people perishing with having more than enough kit to make it, and maybe not the skill or practice behind it.
Well, Aboriginal living in the boreal forest, their exposure to the conditions of the boreal forest starts at the moment they're born.
That's right, yeah.
And so as a result, just like me, and my parents being forest people, that I got insights into fishing, berry picking, mushroom harvesting, the whatever resources that are not on my piece of land. I go on the common lands and supplement that, and life is life is twice as easy because I have access to all of that, mainly how to fill my stomach, from jackrabbits to grouse to fish to blueberries and Saskatoons and on and on. So, your focus to live continuously, you find enough calories to sustain your life until you, in my father's generation, it was common that many people lived till they were 80. But the Aboriginal person who lived to his 80 had the problem of the sunspot cycles. So if you live to your 80, the literature, independent of the author who didn't observe the annual rings of trees, he said that those native people almost starved to death through occasions in those 80 years. And on 8 more occasions, which is essentially 10, 11 years like that, nature did not really provide in such bounty that you had to weather over those, and it's tied into the intensity of the sun.
So that is a cycle.
The sunspots would appear like on the average of 11 and a half years. And that's where At Dawson Creek, I had the opportunity that I almost went through 2 sun cycles. And I could see that at the optimal situation, for example, the most edible plant in that type of forest is called false Solomon seal. Well, at its optimal size, optimal growth, this stalk is about almost the size of my little finger, and it's still usable till it's that tall. Well, you harvest 20 of those, you won't be able to eat them all if you boil them and ate them. And it took 5 minutes to harvest that much Solomon seal. Well, so like the marsh marigold and the Solomon seal, they are found in such quantities that it's easy for the user to enough that makes up a meal. And not only that, but I would have 30 guinea pigs. That was in the month of May, where you've got a marsh marigold and you got stinging nettle. You might end up camping in an area where they're optimal. So many times we'd boil up a huge pot of marsh marigold, a huge pot of stinging nettle, and the students, because you got 30 of them gathered, they fill that pot pretty quickly. But when they eat out of that pot, they're so hesitant to make themselves sick, and it's like a wild thing. It could be trouble. So let's not overindulge here. And when I would see that a large amount left over, it seemed a shame that we would have to throw that out. And I thought, I have the opportunity now to see if I can make myself sick. So I ate large volumes. Because I would say, that's the problem living off the land. Because when the stinging nettle becomes very available, that's all. So that's for a week or two, you're eating nothing but stinging nettle. And then you go on to the next thing that's available. And the stinging nettle, I recall, the stinging nettle was such a high nutritional content that you could detect this increase of the sense of well-being by eating large amounts of stinging nettle. Anyway, so there were a lot of little things like that, because I was a part of my obligation on being a professor for the university. I felt that I should be doing something verifying certain issues if I could. So there's quite a few little things, like at Barrhead. I was aware that Barrhead people all have access to the type of environment that blueberries are available. So within an hour's drive, they'll be into prime blueberry country. So everybody in Barrhead, you could probably find it random that no matter, I'd say, do you ever pick blueberries? Oh, yes, I pick blueberries. So I said to the teachers, ask your students if you could get a blueberry picker that they could bring to class so we could examine them to find out what are the features of an ideal blueberry picker. And as a result of examining all those features, we brought together a prototype and say, okay, here is the blueberry picker. Now, what is blueberries? Blueberry picker, the teeth are a certain spacing and a certain type of bend. And when you go down there to rake the berries off, you don't want to rake, dump. You rake until a bag of a cupful or so fills, then dump. So you go to this. And then on top of that, once the blueberry picker was developed, well, initially, the width of the blueberry picker is by being able to grab the picker like that. And then an old-timer said, we had a handle, so you didn't have to bend your back and take the blueberry picker and just sit up and blueberry pick. And then it occurs, you can make a blueberry picker twice as wide, and you got that long handle, and then you don't have to bend your back, and so on. So there's an evolution that there was nobody put the pen and paper about discussing the points of an ideal blueberry picker. So when we had the opportunity to pick blueberries, because there was this phenomenal year of blueberries. Actually, when you went on a blueberry patch, you saw very little green. It was that solid blueberry color, just like acres and acres ahead of you. And that's where I had already had that program, and I could pick a 5-gallon pail full. My wife ice cream pail full because she was used to picking blueberries, so she would